Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. In this episode, Dorsey interviews another special guest that will give you hope and inspire you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining me on another episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Today, we have a special guest with us. His name is John McLaren. He is a Christian husband and father and a passionate health coach who combines psychology and neuroscience with fitness and nutrition to equip people with the tools to create lasting health. He had survived attempted murder, nearly beaten to death in South Africa, as well as losing his life savings in a falling business venture, and rebuilt himself up from the ground up. He focuses on brain-driven weight loss. His goal is to marry the science of metabolism with the psychology of behavior change and compassion of human connection to create life-changing transformation in his clients. John, thank you for the show today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And it's always interesting to hear my own bio read back. You know, I think about like our lived experience, and sometimes we kind of take it for granted a little bit, like, oh, well, that kind of happened to me and whatever. But you know, yeah, it's been quite a journey. So happy to share a little bit of it here with the audience if it'll help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually I like to ask a icebreaker question to open up the podcast. The first question is, what did you want to be when you were a kid and why?
Oh, man. I had a hard time settling. So it depends on what age we're talking here. But at one point, I wanted to be a firefighter, which is probably a fairly common one. I also wanted to be a chef when I was 9 years old. So I learned how to cook. I don't want to say I taught myself. I did have some help from my parents, but I learned how to cook at a young age because I thought I wanted to be a chef. I think in my younger years, I also thought it'd be cool to be a ninja. I had no idea about jobs and employment. So I thought, well, a ninja sounds pretty cool. And I was probably slightly influenced by the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, to be fair. I thought they were pretty cool. So between firefighter, chef, ninja. In my teen years, I thought maybe a professional mattress tester might have been a fun job where you get paid to sleep. But I never imagined that I would end up doing what I actually do, which is kind of funny. If you'd have told me as a kid that, hey, you're going to be a virtual health coach of all things. I mean, well, of course, I grew up without the internet, right? So I couldn't even imagine like this was a possibility of a career. I actually recall that as kids, we talked about in the future, this technology is going to be so advanced. We're going to be able to do phone calls and see each other on screens. And, and it's funny because here we are now living this thing that we thought was this amazing, mind-blowing technology when we were kids. And now we get to do this through podcasting, which is really cool.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations from people, all across the world and in different countries. Like you're saying, 20, 30 years ago, you would think that would have been an impossible, feat.
Yeah. It was like I grew up with here. This will date me a little bit. The monochrome Game Boy, like dot matrix Game Boy, where you played Tetris and the original like Super Mario Brothers. So like gray. There was no like 3D animation, or it was like 4 buttons on my monochrome Game Boy, and you had to pull a cartridge out and blow in the cartridge, and then like put and try and get it to work again. That was my life.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey of faith and becoming a Christian, and what did that look like for you?
So the South Africa experience is actually going to tie into this too, which is kind of interesting. So I was raised in a small Christian fellowship. And it's kind of interesting because at this point in time, actually, I would have never imagined this either. But the Christian fellowship that I grew up and was raised a part of is making sort of national news right now because of a scandal related to church leadership. And I'll use the term CSA and SA. I can expand on it if people need. but anyway, so I was raised, some people call us the 2x2s, and there's other names like that. The name sort of is derived from our homeless itinerant ministry that sort of lives in the homes of congregants and goes out in pairs. So I was raised in kind of this, I don't want to say oddball. Really, the intent was to sort of follow like the original, what was the word? Commission from Jesus when he sent out his disciples 2 and 2. We could debate whether how scriptural it is or not, but I believe that was the intention behind those who kind of started this fellowship. So that's what I was raised in. I have to give credit to my parents. They said, we'd like you to be a Christian, but we can't choose that for you. You have to choose this for yourself. If we could choose, we would choose this for you, but you have to choose this for yourself. And so there was never really, in a sense, there wasn't this pressure that like I had to perform, so to speak, which I don't think everybody in this fellowship that I'm a part of could say the same necessarily. So my parents were quite forward thinking in that regard. They just recognized that it had to be my choice. So when I was about 14, I thought, this is maybe what I want to do. I do want to commit my life to God. I don't think I fully understood necessarily what I was doing, but if I wanted to commit my life to God, I was baptized when I was 16. So full immersion baptism, indicating that I wanted to really commit my life to God. And the funny thing is, it seems like not long after that was when my life sort of, I don't want to say it went off the rails. It probably makes it sound more dramatic. I just kind of got into the usual teen stuff of like partying, secretly drinking and things like that. It was nothing too wild. I never got wildly drunk or anything like that, but just rebelling basically. So it's funny that I was baptized and committing my life to Christ. And then I got into the usual teen shenanigans, trying to hide it from my parents and things like that. I'm not proud of what I did, but I can't undo what I did. So through my late teens and early 20s, I was kind of trying to find myself and whatnot. And I probably didn't live a very Christian life, so to speak. And then the woman who then is now my wife kind of came into my life and probably tamed me a little bit from being a wild and reckless young person. But what I would say is I felt like, looking back now, I can say that I was probably what I will call a cerebral Christian. So in other words, I have a pretty good brain. I don't take the credit. I got it free of charge, but I got a pretty good brain. I have quite a good memory. I can recite things quite well. I did very well in school just because I could just remember random pieces of information and recite them well for tests. Right? So this also meant that I could kind of be, I would all say, a performative Christian. So in our fellowship gatherings, I could recite a verse and I could quote something and say something that sounded good. But in a sense, my heart wasn't entirely in it. And it wasn't necessarily deliberately or malicious. I wasn't necessarily trying to pretend. But I could say my nature is to sort of coast because of the gifts that I have in terms of I'm a pretty smart guy. Through school, I was kind of able to coast on my intellect and so on. That traveled over into my Christian journey where I was kind of just coasting on my natural gifts of like intellect and memory and things like that. And God's not impressed by that at all, of course. The wisest among us is a drop in the bucket compared to the infinite wisdom of God. So when I was in South Africa, I went through this experience where I was attacked and nearly beaten to death by 4 men. And it was a terrifying, awful, horrible experience to go through. And I'll call it a hellish experience because I feel like I got a little bit of a taste of hell in that experience. I was alone, attacked at night, screaming for help. Nobody was coming to save me. I mean, I do believe that God intervened somehow and gave me the strength and helped me to survive that experience. I don't know how you fight off 4 men after your head's been smashed a few times with a rock and you're concussed and dazed and so on. But somehow I survived that experience. But in that experience, I had this thought, I can't die tonight or my soul is bound for hell. And that was a like, if you want to talk a terrifying thought, when you think I'm going to die and I'm going to end up in hell, there is like nothing more terrifying than that. And that was, I mean, that was one of the blackest moments of my life. And I feel like Belshazzar, when there was that hand that wrote on the wall that said, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And I was like, God was saying to me, like, I see through you. You can fool other people, but I see your heart. And you're a shell. You've been pretending. You're pretending to be a Christian. You can say the right things. You can sound like a Christian, but you haven't really truly given me your heart. And it took like nearly dying and really staring death in the face and my own mortality at 29 years old and just being humbled beyond belief to recognize that like You're not what you think you are, and you're not fooling me. But God, people would think like, why would God put you through this? But God in his mercy does this. It took an experience like this to really reach me and make an impact in my life. And so that was, I don't want to say that like from that day forward, I was like a perfect Christian or something like that. That was the start of almost like a new walk with God, where I had to renew my faith, and I almost had to start from the ground up again and go like, how do I make this my own? What does it really mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to give my heart to God? To yield my life to God. What does that even look like? I had to just rethink so much of what I knew after having gone through that experience. I went through probably, I'm going to say, a decade of mental health struggles because of what I went through in South Africa. So the trauma, the PTSD, there was binge eating and food addiction and all kinds of maladaptive coping mechanisms I didn't understand at the time. I was deeply ashamed of it, because of my very awesome and Christian behavior. But God in his mercy, he saw me through all of this. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm like the perfect Christian now. I'm still a struggling soul, but boy, have I learned a lot along the way, and I've been humbled a lot along the way. And I would not take those experiences out of my past. I'm so grateful that God brought those experiences into my life. I wouldn't ask for them again. I'm not putting my hand up again saying I want to go through that, but I'm so glad that I went through that because of how it changed me. And so that's kind of been my journey to date.
And after those situations, it changed you for the better, I would imagine, correct?
For sure. It absolutely did. It laid bare a lot of things about me that maybe I had previously been able to cover and hide that I couldn't anymore. And it brought out some natural human and physical and emotional and mental struggles in me that really brought me to the end of myself. And I don't want to say that I was cocky, because I don't think I was. It wasn't that I was cocky. But again, I have these gifts that I was given. I was given a very good brain. Like I said, I can't take the credit. I got it free of charge. But I was given these gifts, and I was coasting on them. God was just saying, I'm not impressed. Like, I gave you these gifts, but all you're doing is coasting. And you're not really yielding them to me. So it took that to get me to revisit, like, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to serve God? What does it mean to commit my life to this walk with God, where I can genuinely say I'm a Christian or a child of God?
Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit, because I read in the bio that you help people, with health and fitness and everything. Tell us a little bit about that with your background and what made you get into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So for a long time, I had an interest, just a personal interest in being fit and healthy. And this was I go to that South Africa experience where I gained over 120 pounds through the sort of binge eating and food addiction and my struggles with that. So I'd previously just been fairly fit. And I had this idea about people that were out of shape and that weren't fit and that were overweight and so on, that they were just lazy and not trying hard enough. And boy, did I get humbled. I got humbled immensely because, and people would look at me and go like, well, didn't you notice you were gaining all of this weight? And it's kind of hard to explain if someone hasn't been through the kind of trauma where you dissociate from your body. And like in my mind, I was still picturing myself as the athlete I used to be and so on. Like I was denying the reality of the facts that were staring in my face as basically a coping mechanism for my trauma. And so once I had been obese, like I hit 330 pounds at my peak and had to find my way back from that. It gave me a whole new understanding and insight into what people struggle with. I no longer was just sort of educated about this. I was now living the struggle. And it actually took another coach coming into my life and really modeling for me compassion, for me to start to learn self-compassion. So I really fell into this pattern of self-loathing, self-hatred because of who I'd become. I just was so ashamed that I'd become obese. I was so ashamed I was no longer the athlete I used to be. I just thought that everybody must think I was the worst human being on the planet, the most terrible failure. How could I be as educated as I am? And I couldn't find my way out of this. And someone came into my life and modeled for me compassion. And it was the thing that I needed. And, I look at this again and I go, man, the hand of God in this. You have this one experience over here, but then you have this next experience where it's like, okay, now you need to learn what compassion is and how compassion can help you. Because prior to that, I wasn't showing even myself compassion. So learning that compassion was not about enabling. It's not about ignoring or denying or pretending these harmful behaviors don't exist, but it's the freedom to look at them without judgment so we can get the help that we need. Now, at the time, I was also running I was part owner and running a nutrition and supplement store because I actually have a background in marketing, psychology, and chemistry, which is kind of funny. It really goes well with the supplement industry. So, and I know we're sort of jumping around the story a little bit, but I ended up running a nutrition and supplement store, and I jokingly called myself a bartender without alcohol. So people would come into the store and we just have these conversations at the counter. And I thought, man, these people are looking for a supplement to solve a problem that a supplement can't solve. And one of these other gifts that I have is this ability to read people. And I can't exactly quantify it, but I have kind of this ability to read people and sense what's going on. And so I realized that I'm actually I'm a pretty good coach. And I used to coach athletics as well. I used to be a basketball and volleyball coach and so on. So I have coaching experience. So that I started to see the shortcomings of like nutritional supplements. I'm still a fan of them. I think they certainly beneficial, but I realized people need more than this. And so I kind of casually started coaching people on the side in a very informal fashion. I was not charging very much for what I did. I just wanted to try to help people. Now, when that business failed, and that cost me my life savings and left me with a mountain of debt, there's another humbling experience to go through. I'm like, boy, God has sure humbled me a lot in my life. But again, it's wonderful and incredible to see the provision of God when we lose absolutely everything. And then God shows us he can still provide for us. It's absolutely incredible. It's a wonderful thing. So then I started coaching like just virtually. I was like, well, I don't have the money to start another bricks and mortar business. I don't have any money. I just have a mountain of debt. What could I do? And so then I just went to my clientele and said, hey, I'm now doing this virtually, and started coaching people via email and Zoom. And I didn't really know exactly what I was doing as an online virtual coach, but I've been kind of coaching people informally for a couple of years at this point. And so I just started learning from scratch how to build this online business. And the amazing thing about coaching people is they teach me so much. Like I think maybe as a coach that I teach and guide and help people, and absolutely I do. I bring a type of expertise into this, but I learn so much from my clients. Every client teaches me something, and it's actually this incredible exchange. A coach is not a guru. A coach is like a facilitator and a guide. I like to say that a coach is like a guide by your side, not a sage on the stage. And so that kind of got me into that. And the more you get into it, the more I realized, okay, this isn't just about information. Like, yes, I'm educated in terms of the science of nutrition and metabolism and exercise science and things like that. I have this stuff in my background, but it's about like the lived human experience. And we need more than anything else. We need compassion. And, we need like gentle guidance. You don't need a coach hard ass or things like that. And so my coaching style just began to evolve and change. And so now I say like the compassion of human connection is like the glue that makes this work. When we enter into this sort of coaching relationship and people become vulnerable, because it's a scary thing to try and change. It's a scary thing. It's hard. This whole getting healthy business is hard. And this is going to sell a lot of programs. I guarantee you when I'm sitting here telling you it's hard, right? Like that's a great marketing line. But I feel like I have to tell people the truth of this. Not that they don't already know this, but we'd like to pretend it's not. We'd like to buy the 21-day fix or the 30-day fix or whatever, the 8-week challenge or whatever. The reality is this is a lifelong struggle because we live in a world that's hostile to being healthy, hostile to being physically healthy, hostile to being mentally healthy, hostile to being spiritually healthy. And one of the things I've actually been realizing in recent days, kind of feeling pulled a little bit more is we can't ignore the spiritual aspect of like our struggle with health, because the health of our spiritual health is in some ways manifested and reflected in our physical health, the way that we take care of ourselves, the way that we honor the temple that God gave us. That's not meant to judge or shame anybody, but to say that I'm realizing I've been finding myself saying, hey, AA got something right when they said we need to call upon a higher power to get help with this kind of stuff. There is so much that is like arrayed against people when they're trying to get healthy, from like food manufacturers that are just deliberately and intentionally making food immensely addictive, using psychological marketing that just like undermines people's psyche. in an attention negativity driven economy, like that's just made to make you unhappy, a world that's more emotionally stressful than ever before. There's a biology that wants to store fat because we're wired to survive famines. Like we're literally wired to store fat so we can survive famines. Like there is so much that makes this incredibly challenging to do. We need all the help and support we can get. And so somebody can tap into a higher power and ask God to help them through their struggles. Absolutely get all the help you can need, all the help you can get in this process.
Now, you mentioned something back then, and then it connected to the spiritual and Bible, basically. You said that living a healthy lifestyle, trying to live a healthy lifestyle, trying to be fit, is a lifelong process.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, isn't that the same way where if we're trying to be more like God every day and we're trying to get rid of the sins and the temptations that we deal with in our lives from the spiritual aspect, that's sanctification. That's a lifelong process.
Man, it is. I tell you what, you hit the nail on the head, right? I just think like every time I might start to think like, okay, I went through this really hard experience and this really worked something into my life. Oh, but then this next really hard experience came along and worked something else. Okay, but then this next really hard experience came along, and then fatherhood comes in. I have 2 young boys now. At the time of recording, I have a 3-year-old and an almost 1-year-old. And oh man, again, talk about being humbled. These boys, I mean, I got to tell you, I never knew how much I could love a little human. But being a father to these boys, like, when my little fella topples over and he has a black eye, because he fell off of something and bonked his head, like I feel so much pain in my own body when my little child hurts himself. I'm now being humbled and learning what it means to be a father. And then I think about God, our Father, and how he feels towards us, his children, his creation. And I think about the love and how like I want my children to do well and I want to protect them and I want to help them and I want to guide them. But the funny thing is I recognize that like I can't always intervene. I have to let my kids struggle sometimes in order to learn something. I'm just getting the tiniest little taste of what it's like for God to look down on us, his children, and his creation. And God doesn't bring us through hard experiences because he somehow enjoys watching us suffer or anything like that. No. God only brings us through what we need to work something into our life. But yeah, there's a lot of parallels between physical health and spiritual health. And again, this is not intended to be a criticism or judgment towards anybody. I still have to work at my health and fitness. It is a lifelong pursuit. I can't stop caring for my health now. Otherwise, I'll just deteriorate back into where I was at my worst. Every day we have to invest in our spiritual health, reading our Bible, praying, connecting with God, connecting with the Holy Spirit. There's this tremendous parallel. And when we recognize that our body is a temple, it doesn't mean that we need to be bodybuilders and take pictures shirtless or try to glorify ourselves physically or things like that. I don't believe that's what God intended. But we take care of our bodies because we want to, with whatever gifts and abilities we have, we want to be able to offer them to God in his service. And the healthier we are, generally speaking, the more able we tend to be for God to use us.
Yeah. Now there's so many, and in your story, you lost 100 pounds, and we can get into that after this question. But
Yeah.
there's so many weight loss programs and weight loss gurus and all of this out there. I mean, you may not have the perfect answer, but why is that? And is there something out there that can actually help people? Like you said, it's there's nothing that you can use or that you can do in 60 days that will keep that weight off. And or is it just like you said, a lifelong process that if I do this for 60 days, I'm going to keep it. I'll lose 50 pounds and I'll keep it off and it will never come back again.
Right. In a sense, we think, wouldn't that be nice? Just lose the weight and say, sweet, I'm done. I'm good. I've done all the work and now I can just coast for the rest of my life. No, I will say I've watched as I go through like life and like my coaching career and working with people and I've worked with over 1,000 clients in the last decade, which kind of blows my mind to even say that number. Like I never would have thought that would be a thing. And really it's a drop in the bucket. I mean, there's much bigger companies out there that work with way more people than I have, but nonetheless, I've gained a lot of experience along the way. And I'm starting to realize that here's what I would kind of say. There are times in life where maybe we have capacity and it's appropriate to do like a sprint, to make a dedicated push with an above average level of effort that we have to acknowledge we can't sustain. Maybe we would make a really intense push for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks, something like that. But if we're going to do that, we want to acknowledge that we can't sustain it. So we might use that for a dedicated push for a period of time to help us to get to a certain level. And then we fall back into what I'll call maintenance mode. Because if we're not at least trying to maintain where we're at, we're going to be sliding backwards because the ever-present drip of time and age is dripping in the background. I recognize it now. I'm 42. And today, like I went and I worked out and I shot some hoops. I used to be, relatively speaking, I used to be a pretty good basketball player. I wasn't going to make I've no way.
Is there anything that you haven't done in your life?
Well, it turns out I have ADHD. And so I guess what that means is I do a whole bunch of different stuff. I won't list all 11 basically professions or careers that I've had, but I've done a lot until I finally settled on this coaching thing. What I was going to say was I went and shot some hoops today and I can still shoot okay. Man, I can definitely tell that I'm 42 and not 22. I don't move like a 22-year-old anymore. But nonetheless, it's still worth trying to pursue health. But okay, so what I was going to say, this idea of sprints and kind of like this maintenance thing, it's like there's periods of times where we make that dedicated push, and there's periods of time where we just kind of fall into just maintaining where we're presently at. And I think people need to come to this place of acceptance where it's okay sometimes to just maintain where we're presently at, where we're lining ourselves up or keeping ourselves in the position for when the conditions are right that we can make a dedicated push, that we go and make a push again. But when we do a push or a sprint, let's acknowledge that it's going to be a short-term effort that we can't sustain forever so that we're okay with when we have to stop doing that sprint. One of the biggest things that really gets overlooked, and I kind of have to update the stuff on my website to talk more about this, and I want to talk more about it, is really nervous system health. We talk a lot about mental health, but I'm not hearing, we talk about stress and we talk about mental health and things, but I'm not hearing a lot of talk about nervous system health as a whole. But that really dictates what our capacity is, how healthy our nervous system is. And a lot of my work is now starting to go towards helping people have healthier nervous systems, which then create the capacity for the types of stress that we introduce when we pursue health. Because let's say it's a little bit stressful to change our eating. It's a little bit stressful to change or increase our activity level. Whenever we bring change into our life, there is some stress. And so we want to make sure we have capacity for it. I encourage adopting what I call like a dial mindset. So a lot of us have this switch mindset, on or off. I'm 10 out of 10 or I'm 0 out of 10. No in between. But if I look at like the people that I see who are successful in the long term, it's this ability to adjust the dial based on their capacity. So sometimes we're at a place where we're 8, 9, sometimes even 10 out of 10. We can really go for it. But other times, maybe we're like a 1 out of 10. And we want to be okay with those times when we're only a 1 out of 10, where we're staying in the smallest way possible, still engaged with this process of trying to be healthy. But it's a 1 out of 10. When my second son was born, and anyone who's a parent, like when you go from 1 to 2 kids, like life gets trickier. And hey, there's parents out there that have like 5 kids, and my hat's off to you. I don't know how you do it. 2 seems tricky enough right now, but maybe just the more you add, the more you kind of just figure this business out. I don't know. But like life got flipped on its head. And all of a sudden now we got 2 humans to try to keep alive who are depending on us. That was hard. I didn't have the capacity to be going to the gym and crushing workouts and things like that. I had to figure out like, what can I do right now? Can I do 15 minutes? Can I go for a little walk? Can I do some workouts with my resistance bands? Like, what can I do at home to make this work? So what if I could just encourage people, it would be like, be okay with sometimes being a 1 out of 10. Sometimes you're a 5 out of 10. Sometimes you can be 8 or 9 out of 10. Know how to adjust the dial based on what your present capacity is. And that helps you to stay engaged with the process in the long term. it's not always going to be 10 out of 10.
And you said that you had a lot of, jobs and a lot of things that you did before what you're doing now. And I noticed on the website that you did if I remember correctly, a 40 country nomad experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. So I used to be in the Navy. I was a Marine engineer in the Canadian Navy. And at a certain point, I kind of half joke, but maybe half serious, that the military breeds divorced alcoholics. And I thought, well, I love my wife and I don't want to become a divorced alcoholic. So maybe I need to think about doing something different. So I came home one day and said, why don't we just go teach English somewhere? And so we hopped on a plane. There's obviously a couple of months in between, but then, a couple of months later, here we are hopping on a plane, packed everything into storage, hopped on a plane, flew down to Mexico, started teaching English down there, not really knowing what we're doing, thinking maybe we're going to go for like 6 months and just get this out of our system or whatever. And that turned into like this 3-year sort of globe-trotting adventure where we traveled all over the world. And we basically circumnavigated the globe. Like we went from Mexico. We thought we were going to go down to South America, but we got job offers in Italy. So then we took up some work in Italy, and then we ended up going to Poland and then down to South Africa and then back over to Australia where my wife is from. And then kind of did a giant global U-turn. Instead of flying across the Pacific back to Canada, we did this giant global U-turn where we went back through Turkey, where I am presently. I'm currently in Turkey where my brother lives, back into Poland and Italy and the UK and over back to Canada. So we spent 3 years just traveling on the world. We've lived in Canada, Australia, Mexico, Italy, Poland, South Africa, Turkey. I think that's it. So we lived in about 7 different countries. We visited about 45 countries. At this point, we might actually be getting close to 50 countries, which is kind of cool. Most people don't care. I don't think it impresses people all that much. But in my head, I thought I wanted to get to 30 countries, like visit 30 countries before I turned 30. And then I thought, man, if I could get to 50 countries before I turn 50, I got a bit of time. I'm 42. But I thought that would be kind of cool as well. There's something really, what I love about traveling is you can't help but have your mind opened. The world over in different ways, like there's different flavors, if you will, but we're all trying to do the same thing, like make a living, feed our family, somehow get through this life relatively well. None of us get through it unscathed, but we're just trying to get through life, feed our family, take care, like how, and the more we're way more the same than we are different. And I think traveling is a wonderful way to open our mind to that possibility.
Can you give us a quick overview how you came to losing your weight and what was the process of that?
Oh, so I joke that I've lost like 600 pounds because I lost and gained weight a number of times. And that ties into this idea that this is a lifelong process. Part of it was like doing unsustainable things. I could do it for so long, lose a certain amount of weight, and then regain some of the weight back, and then lose a bit more weight, and then gain some of it back. It was this up and down yo-yo roller coaster kind of thing because I was just doing things that weren't sustainable. And so I'd love to be like, oh yeah, all I did was this one thing and I lost 100 pounds. I just started this diet and stuck with it, and ta-da. It turns out there are things out there that work. In fact, many diets will work for a period of time, but eventually they become unsustainable. And so the process was really this sort of up and down thing, trying to figure out like what actually works for me. And so ultimately what I sort of discovered in this process of trial and error was, I do pretty good with some intermittent fasting. I don't think it's a miracle cure for anything, but it's a really simplifies life in some senses. So a bit of intermittent fasting. I do better with a lower carbohydrate approach. I don't think people have to go keto and zero carb. You can if you want to. Some people do really well with it. I didn't. Generally speaking, like a bit of intermittent fasting with a lower carbohydrate approach and staying active eventually leads to getting healthy. But sometimes it's just a case of, I think, again, this doesn't sound very flashy, but just sticking with the process through the ups and downs. The commitment became not really about weight loss, but like, what are the things I'm going to do to try to stay healthy? I got to try to stay active. I got to try to eat healthy. I got to try to make good choices more often than not. It eventually happens. Now, there were times in there where I did like a sprint, where I made an intense push, dieted super hard, trained super hard and things like that. But I came to the realization, like I've been talking about, that I couldn't sustain it forever. And so it's like in between those times that I make a push, what are the things that I do? Bit of intermittent fasting, lower carbohydrate intake, monitor my sugar intake, limit processed foods, try to sleep. I got 2 young kids, so sleep is a bit of a joke right now. I imagine one day I'll be able to get a full night's sleep again sometime in my life. I haven't given up hope on that. But really, the fundamental principles of being healthy are hydrate, protein at most meals, lots of vegetables, move your body, manage your stress proactively. So include some form of meditation, breathing exercises, whatever. In some way, have a proactive stress management practice. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. What it really takes is figuring out, how do I make these fundamental principles of healthy living, like how do I adapt them to my personal circumstances? Your physical ability is probably different than my physical ability. We're 2 different people. And so maybe what I do for my type of exercise or activity might look different than what you do based on your physical ability, right? But the principle remains the same of trying to be active and move your body in whatever way you can, in whatever way you're able to. Maybe your taste preferences are different than mine. So the fundamental principle might be like include vegetables in your diet, but maybe you hate broccoli. Maybe you don't. I don't, but like that kind of idea. So you figure out like, okay, what does this look like for me? But here's the principles, and then how do I shape this for me? And that kind of becomes the baseline, this sort of fundamental way of living.
Yeah. And that's what you do in your coaching as well, in your business is what you
Yeah, I would. So each person's on kind of a unique and individual journey. I'm also kind of an engineer. I mean, I was an engineer, but I take a bit of an engineering approach to this as well. So I kind of help people engineer their own healthy lifestyle. So we're going to go through these different factors. So in addition, so I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach. I'm a master health coach, master nutrition coach, certified sleep science coach, certified stress management coach. Like I got lots of pieces of paper with my name on it. Because once you get into this business, you're like, well, I'm just going to keep learning because why not? Specialist in change psychology. Like I got all these pieces of paper with my name on it instead of study, But the point being, what I've recognized is that we can't just deal with like one variable in isolation. How well we sleep will in some ways dictate the kinds of food choices we tend to make. How well we sleep might dictate what we're able to do in terms of activity. How well we manage our stress might dictate like what capacity we have for activity and so on. How active we are might dictate to some degree what our food choices can be and so on and so forth. Everything is kind of connected to everything. What about our social relationships? What about our mental health? These sorts of things. And so what I think I am able to do quite well is take a lot of variables in an individual's life and distill down into the simplest high leverage behaviors. In other words, like the simpler we can make this process, the more likely it is to stick. Like we're attracted to complexity, and boy, I can engineer a complicated plan for people. It seems like you get results faster making it complicated, but we don't, because we just can't stick with it the moment life gets difficult. And then part of the process is really this process of trial and error. Okay, so it's like working with a coach. Maybe it's an imperfect analogy, but let's say it's a bit like having some training wheels on. You get to try this stuff out. You get to screw up and make mistakes and have someone kind of help you work through like, hey, how did this happen? Or why did this happen? What can we do differently next time? How do we need to adjust this? You have someone by your side. And then the ups and downs of life, someone there who can hear you and listen to you and validate you and encourage you and so on. I can't overstate the importance of having somebody in your corner for this process. I would say it's kind of a unique approach to some degree, a fairly unique approach, because I don't just hand people like, here's how you got to go to the gym and do this. And then you got to eat this way because this is the way. It's like, no, let's figure out what works for you and let's honor your autonomy and your independence, which in some ways I recognize as I share about this makes it sound like, okay, this sounds a little bit nebulous, but really what it is we're going through this process of figuring out what works best for you. And I use my expertise to help you understand how to best leverage your time and energy.
Yeah. Is there a way that people can connect with you? People are listening today and they're
Sure.
like, hey, I struggle with health and struggle with, different things in my life that have to do with my health. I want to connect with him, even, say hi. How can people connect with you?
You can go to freedomnutritioncoach.com freedomnutritioncoach.com. So it's all one word, no spaces, no dots, freedomnutritioncoach.com. On the homepage, you'll see a little video of me talking. Hey, nice to meet you. There's a link where you can book a complimentary 30-minute call with me. You'll just talk to me in a conversation. This isn't a heavy-handed sales pitch or anything. I want to get to know you. I want to know what your struggles are and figure out, am I the right person for you? I'm busy enough. I'll say I have capacity to work with people. My roster isn't like full to the brim, but on the same token, I have the flexibility to be able to say, hey, if you're not right for me, I'll try to help you find someone who is. Or if it looks like we're a good match to work together, then we can talk about what that might look like. But first, we're just going to have a conversation where you get to chat with me, feel my energy. What is it like to interact with me? What is it like to converse with me? Do we connect? That's so important. And so I want people to have a very low stress, low key, casual, relaxed conversation. At the end of the conversation, even if we don't work together, I guarantee you're going to take something away that you can do differently in your life that'll help you move forward with your health. And that's what I want to offer people. The best way to show them that I'm able to help them is to actually help them. And then if they choose to work with me in an ongoing fashion, we can figure out what that looks like. So that's where I should just say there's a link on the website where you can book a call. That'll make it easy.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We greatly appreciate having you. And one last question is, for those that are listening and maybe struggling, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, what encouragement would you give to them?
I think my favorite piece of advice right now is that compassionate awareness is the foundation of transformational change. So that's a very weighty, kind of meaty sentence. But through the lens of compassion, we can become aware of our struggles. We have to face them. We have to look at the messy, the dirty, the whatever, the icky, the stuff that we're struggling with. We have to look at that. But through the lens of compassion, without judgment, when we can look at those behaviors and acknowledge where we're presently at and what we're presently struggling with, that compassionate awareness is the start of making transformational change. And so I just want to encourage people to look at their struggles and recognize their humanity. It's human to struggle. So look at yourself through this lens of compassion. Allow yourself to become aware of what is your struggle. Face up to your struggles without judgment. And that's the foundation of making transformational change in your life.
Well, again, John, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We greatly appreciate having you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, guys and girls, thank you again for coming on the show and listening. And please like and review. Go check out the website. And please, make a donation if you like to the Dorsey Ross Show so that we can continue to make great content. And until next time, God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Please like, share, and tell others about the show. Also, please check out the other podcast episodes. And if you would like, donate to this podcast and buy Dorsey a coffee. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.